Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Josh D'Alessandro, and I'm very excited to be discussing a really interesting topic, the benefits of prolonged fasting. So, what I'm going to do today is share with you a lot of interesting research that I've compiled over the years, but also some anecdotal research and evidence that I've experienced personally with prolonged fasting. And before we begin, I do want to say this is a rather radical, aggressive form of or an approach to health and wellness. It's definitely not recommended to everyone. I always, if anyone ever asks me, hey, should I fast for 2 to 3 to 4 days? I always encourage them to loop in their nutritionist, their registered dietitian, their primary care physician, anybody who is part of their healthcare team in their circle. It's always good to have other people informed of what you're trying to do because although there are a lot of benefits, there are some things that could go wrong if you're immunocompromised or you have some other issues going into the fast. So, generally speaking, a prolonged fast is basically 24 hours or more of not eating anything. And there are different types where some restrict water, others you can drink water. All the fasts that I'm going to be talking about today is assuming that we are drinking water in a lot of it the entire time. Okay. So here's our game plan. For the next 30 minutes or so, what I want to do is discuss benefits of prolonged fasting. Generally, 3 days is kind of the magic spot. A lot of the research that I'm going to share with you, all of the experiments range from 48 hours to 96 hours. After the 96-hour mark, a lot of these benefits kind of taper off or just they're not as easily seen. So generally 2 to 3 days is kind of the sweet spot, 3 days specifically. But we're going to talk about how prolonged fasting for about 3 days can really benefit things like the immune system, your hormones and the endocrine system, and even some musculoskeletal parts as well. Then afterwards, I'm going to talk about a little bit of longevity, and that's really what got me personally into this type of research. Is I really, as I'm aging, I'm seeing a few things go wrong. I'm starting to break down. I don't heal as well from a tough workout or from an injury. So I started researching on what can I do to really age better, and as I live my life into my older years, how can I have a higher quality of life by doing something now? And we'll talk about what fasting does from a longevity standpoint. And then we'll talk about how to approach this and the refeeding process, which is really underestimated. Generally speaking, after not eating for 2 or 3 days, you don't want to just go and eat a buffet full of food and make up for lost time. One, your stomach's not really going to allow you to do that. But two, you might negate a lot of the benefits that we're going to discuss in the next 30 minutes or so. And then I'll give you my game plan of what I do when I start reintroducing food. And I'm constantly changing this and adapting this based on how I feel. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. By no means am I the expert on prolonged fasting, but I'll share my resources and references, and hopefully I can answer any questions or concerns as we go. And please feel free to discuss in the chat as well. I have the chat pulled up, so if there are any questions, we can pause and I can address those as well. All right, everyone. So let's first discuss the immune system. The immune system, really interesting to see how it adapts and adjusts with prolonged fasting. So in a fed state, when we have a lot of food in our body, our cells are kind of in a growth mindset, an anabolic state. And that's a good thing. We want our muscle cells and our bone cells and our nervous system cells to do that. We want to grow. However, cancer cells, tumor cells, even pathogenic bacterial and fungal cells also do the same thing. If we feed them sugar and proteins and fats, they can possibly grow as well. So what's really interesting is in a fasted state, those pathways that inhibit tumor cell growth are actually paused. They're inhibited. So basically, when you are in a somewhat starved condition, the tumor cells or cancer cells throughout our bodies also starve. And that really allows a kind of a jump start for our white blood cells and other immune factors to really kind of kick it into high gear and wipe out and take care of some of those cancer cells. Because at the end of the day, not to spoil the mood or anything, but we all have cancer activity. We all have tumor-like cells in our bodies right now, regardless of age. All a cancer cell or tumor cell is a mutated cell. The DNA has been destroyed or changed or altered in some form or fashion. So our white blood cells, our immune system are constantly 24/7 monitoring and trying to destroy these types of cells. So what does happen during a fast state is we get this elevated enzyme called AMP kinase or AMP kinase. And what that does is it plays a really big role with this big word that I put in caps for you is autophagy. So the major takeaway, if you take one word or one segment from this seminar, this lecture, is this word autophagy. And what that translates to, if you break it down, auto in Latin actually means self, and phagy translates from Latin to English as eating. So literally, you put it together, it's self-eating. And that's essentially what our cells are doing during a fasted state. It's either self-eating, self-cleaning. It's basically a recycling process and a spring cleaning kind of deal. As our body goes through different metabolic activities, we have a lot of breakdown, we have a lot of waste products and really just gunk that builds up within our cells. So our body goes through this autophagy process all the time. Every time you exercise, when we sleep, our bodies are constantly trying to clean everything from the inside out. However, when you are in a fasted state, this autophagy, this self-cleaning process is really accelerated. So what we're doing is we're basically just kind of wiping and getting a clean slate with a lot of our cells, specifically the immune system. And I'll share other tissues in just a moment. So many of you may be familiar with intermittent fasting. I imagine a lot of you have done that in some form or fashion or know people who have done that. And with that said, a lot of you probably experience a little bit of autophagy. You know, once we get to around 18 to 24 hours of not having any ingested food in our body, we do see autophagy in neutrophils, which is a type of white blood cell that attacks mainly bacteria and fungus. And really how this is accomplished is just our sugar levels start dropping and our body, our metabolism starts changing to another fuel source. And what that does is it just kind of stimulates, again, this cleaning process. After 48 hours of not eating any food, we see autophagy not just in white blood cells, but in other tissues such as the liver and the brain. And you think about those two organs. One, the liver is basically our self-cleaner for the entire body, right? It's our detoxifier. All of our waste products, our toxins, even our pharmaceuticals, a lot of our medications are metabolized and broken down by the liver. And then, of course, the brain, very important, right? We want to make sure our brain cells are nice and happy and healthy and don't have too much gunk building up, right? A lot of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, there's a lot of associations with just waste products in the brain, which contributes to some of that atrophy that we see with those conditions. So this self-cleaning, self-eating process has been shown to mitigate or at least lessen the chances of somebody potentially ending up with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or at least slowing down the process. After 72 hours, the body starts breaking down old immune cells and we start making brand new ones. And what that comes from is the red bone marrow. So our red bone marrow is what makes all blood cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, you name it. And after 72 hours of in a fasted state, nothing but water, our body starts just going around and not just self-cleaning from the inside out of cells, but it just really starts discarding old cells that have been there a while and maybe aren't pulling their weight. And that stimulates the red bone marrow to make brand new cells. So in a lot of autoimmune conditions, people have seen really good results with just kind of resetting their system. And as I mentioned, I'm going to share some of my story. And I used to have something called cold urticaria. And what that means is whenever I went out in cold temperatures, especially when I exercised, my skin would start to break out in hives. And it was just an immune response. My body just wasn't adapting to the cold well. And I would get hives all up and down my arms and really on my torso. And that happened for about 2 or 3 years. And then after going through a couple of fasts, I did a 60-hour fast and an 84-hour fast, separate, months apart. Um, this issue that I was having stopped. I no longer get those hives. Now there could be some other variables. That there could be a lot of different things that could potentially heal that problem. However, one thing in common was I started doing more of these prolonged fasts to where I saw better results. So not guaranteeing, it's not a cure, it's not a treatment for an autoimmune condition by any means, but there are some positive results that I've experienced and other folks through research have experienced as well. Also, at the 72-hour mark, you get activation of some really neat cells, T cells, natural killer cells that are really focusing on fighting those cancer cells that I mentioned, also viral particles as well, COVID-19 being a big one. And then we also get regulation of T suppressor cells or T regulatory cells to make sure our immune system isn't too overactive, which is what's happening during an autoimmune condition. And B cell function as well, which is indirectly responsible for making antibodies. So our immune system can remember when something is attacking us. So the next time we get attacked by it, we can stop it in its tracks before we even exhibit any signs or symptoms. So a lot of neat things. Again, kind of the sweet spot. A lot of the research stops at 72 to 96 hours. But even after 24 hours, even after 48 hours, we see a lot of neat results with fasting. And that's just with the immune system. Moving forward, let's talk about the endocrine system. We see some really neat changes with our hormones in a fasted state. And there's dozens and dozens of hormones that are impacted. I'm really only going to talk about three. Growth hormone is one of them. And a lot of people do fasting for many different reasons. Like I said, I started my experience for more of a longevity approach. I just wanted to be healthier, feel better, live longer. A lot of folks do it for weight loss, and that's intermittent fasting is a really great way to do it. And prolonged fasting can also be a great way to do it. Just it's a little bit more of an extreme. But one of the reasons why that happens is one, you're not consuming calories during this time, but also at the 48-hour mark, we have a hormone known as growth hormone that surges. And it surges about 5 times our normal baseline compared to when we're awake. So we naturally secrete growth hormone when we exercise, specifically weightlifting, heavy exercise. And then also, of course, when we sleep, that's when most of our growth hormone is secreted. However, during the day, while we're awake, growth hormone is very, very kind of plateaued, pretty much somewhat non-existent throughout the day. However, in a fasted state around 48 hours, it's 5 times the normal amount. So what growth hormone does for our body is a lot of things, but mainly it's the ultimate muscle builder and fat burner hormone. You can take all sorts of different supplements and herbs. You can take steroids for muscle building, you name it. That all kind of pales in comparison to the effect of growth hormone. Growth hormone is also really important in the regenerative and healing process with injured blood vessels, cardiovascular function as well. So it's a really, really neat way. One of my big concerns when I started fasting was, am I going to lose muscle mass? Okay, like I'm okay dropping 4 or 5 pounds. That sounds good. Am I going to lose everything that I've been working toward at the gym the last X amount of months by not eating for 2 days? And the answer to that is no. With a lot of different research, it shows not only can you maintain muscle mass during a fast, but you can actually improve it because this growth hormone does surge. Another really interesting thing that does occur is just after that 48-hour mark, 54 hours into the fast, insulin is at an all-time low. And this is really, really important, especially if somebody is on the borderline of being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, if you're pre-diabetic. What this does is this process of crashing your insulin, it makes your body, all sorts of cells. We'll talk about muscle cells in just a moment, but it makes cells all over the body really insulin sensitive. And the problem with most folks with type 2 diabetes is it's not that they have an issue with making insulin. It's their cells stop responding to the insulin. They become resistant to the insulin. And that's what causes the blood sugar issues. So basically, again, we're doing just this big, complete reset to where our cells, after not having any intake for 2.5 days or 2 days, our bodies say, hey, let's make some more receptors, let's upregulate and get more insulin in the body. So they become more sensitive. And therefore, when you do eat, your body's more acclimated and adjusted to be able to lower your blood sugar levels. And that's the name of the game when we're talking about controlling diabetes, which is really interesting and also plays a really big role with muscle composition. That last but not least, with the endocrine system, we get a huge boost of norepinephrine, which is also known as noradrenaline. This is kind of your fight or flight hormone. A lot of folks worry that, oh, okay, I'm going to go on a 2 or 3 day fast. I need to just crawl up in a ball on a couch and not do anything. I need to conserve all energy. And that's actually the opposite. Once you get past a little plateau, and everybody's a little different when they hit that wall, once you get past that wall, your body starts secreting a lot of these fight or flight hormones. Norepinephrine's one, cortisol is another, to where not only do you have energy throughout the fast, sometimes you have too much energy to where it can actually cause insomnia and affect some sleep patterns, which that's why I never went past 3 days. I start losing sleep significantly after the third day. It is one of the side effects of all these hormones going through the roof. Muscle composition looks good. Growth hormone, I feel good. I have energy. However, you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons, right? If you're trying to be healthy, but you're only getting a few hours of sleep per night, are you doing more damage than good? That's something that you have to ask yourself and your healthcare team. Moving right along, muscles. Again, one of my main concerns was, am I going to lose muscle mass? Am I going to lose bone density? How much am I going to lose by not eating for 2 or 3 days? And from a weight perspective, generally I lose around 5 to 6% of my body weight in about a 3 day span, which is pretty drastic. It is, again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, it's radical, it is aggressive. However, during a 2 to 3 day fast, you notice all these things on the slide. We have decreased inflammation, which is the problem for so many different conditions, not just autoimmune, but just the general pains and aches and chronic issues that most people experience. Whether it's just from habits or sitting at a desk all day, you name it, or even stress alone, decreased inflammation can be a game changer. We see a lot of stress resistance with the mitochondria. We see protection against oxidation, which is basically a byproduct of our muscle cells working as we break down energy. Again, there are waste products. There is gunk that builds up within our cells. It's natural. But in a fasted state, this autophagy, this self-cleaning, self-eating process, again, really kickstarts to where your muscles start, one, they start cleaning out, but two, the mitochondria, which are the energy factories in your muscle, actually get stronger. Not to mention at the very bottom, you see something called mitochondrial biogenesis, which means not only are the existing mitochondria getting stronger, but we're actually making more mitochondria, which is going to play a role in more energy and the ability to do more. Now, one question I usually get is, what kind of exercise do I want to do during the prolonged fast? Do I want to exercise at all? And the answer is yes, you do want to exercise. It actually really helps you. So I mentioned the plateau. A lot of folks, after about 18 to 24 hours, it's right between 18 and 21. I get this, this kind of fog. I get a headache. Of course, my stomach's grumbling, but I kind of just get this, I really don't feel good. I want to lie down. I don't want to do anything. My energy's sapped and I'm just kind of tired. One way to get through that, believe it or not, is to exercise. And that's the last thing you feel like doing. However, once you start getting your blood pumping and once your muscles start releasing certain chemicals called myokines, and once your body really kicks into ketosis at that point and you start using ketones as an alternative fuel source, not only does that fog head up a lot of times clear up, but you actually get a big surge of energy after a workout. Now, the big thing is you do kind of want to avoid endurance workouts. You don't really want to be doing 10Ks and half marathons in an extended fasted state. Generally, what we're talking about with muscle preservation, with the mitochondrial resistance, with the insulin sensitivity, is more of a strength training. Now, it doesn't have to be weightlifting. It doesn't have to be, bench press or squats. It can just be body weight. It can be a push-up. It can be resistance bands. It can be all sorts of different things, but you don't exactly want to get your heart rate into the high for target zone 4 or 5 kind of thing. You want your heart rate kind of at a moderate pace during this fast, and you just want to kind of put your muscles under some type of stress to get these results. Moving right along, so those are the 3 organ systems and really all organ systems are impacted by fasting. Those are 3 that I just found of really significant interest that we can see some really cool results. But again, why I got into this and why I'm so passionate about sharing this with everyone is longevity. Is how can fasting in my teens and my 20s and my 40s, how can this impact my future self? And there's 3 really cool things that I found. Number 1 is the ability for our body to transport this molecule called BDNF. You see that in the first bullet point. Basically, what happens is when we're low on glucose, we start running on ketones. And one of the really neat ketones is called beta hydroxybutyrate. And that plays a really big role in helping transport certain chemicals directly in the brain cells. And BDNF is one of those really cool chemicals, really, really cool molecule. What that stands for is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And what that does, what's the significance? What it does is it plays a really big role in neuroplasticity, specifically in the learning and memory portions of your brain, believe it or not. So this molecule slows down as we age naturally. It happens to everybody, regardless of circumstance. However, during a fasted state, we naturally synthesize a lot of this molecule. So this can play a very big role with neuronal connections, making more connections in the brain to help us with learning and memory. But also it slows down a lot of those neurodegenerative processes, as I mentioned, like Alzheimer's, other types of dementia, and Parkinson's. So even if you don't have a genetic susceptibility to some of those conditions, there's all sorts of different atrophy or issues that can go on with the brain. Why not increase this chemical, right? Why not help increase learning and memory? Other things that I found, there was a really neat protein called PGC1A. And what that does is play a role with that biogenesis of mitochondria, but in the neurons. So I mentioned in the previous slide, we make more mitochondria, more energy factories in the muscle cells. However, we also have molecules that play a big role in making more mitochondria in your neurons. And the more energy, the more ATP, the energy molecule that your brain can make, the more efficient it'll work. And the easier you'll learn new things, and the easier you'll memorize new things, and the easier your brain will be able to adapt to toxins and waste products and stress on the body, which I found was really, really neat. And then the last protein is called SIRT3. It's shortened for sirtuin 3. And what that does is play a neuroprotective role. So again, all this gunk, all this waste product that builds up, it plays a role in just helping this autophagy process, this self-cleaning, this flushing out. And we really see elevated SIRT3 levels in extended fast, really after 48 hours and beyond. We also get this really cool molecule called myokines that I mentioned. Myokines, they are released from muscle tissue, and they actually are absorbed into the brain. And this also just plays a role with neuroprotection, and also that neuroplasticity, the learning memory center specifically. So we naturally release myokines with exercise. We naturally release this as we fast. But if you were to prolong fast and exercise, as I mentioned, you kind of get this snowball effect where all of these cumulative benefits start really stacking on top of one another, which is really, really neat. Other cool things that occur that have been seen and observed in research is decreased blood pressure and cholesterol levels, heart rate variability, stress adaptation with the heart, increase of bone health. A lot of times that autophagy process occurs in the skeleton. We clean up old bone cells and start making new ones, which is really neat. And then there's a lot of spiritual and mental benefits as well. Regardless of your faith, your belief systems, your religious preferences, whatever historical text that you view, there's fasting in a lot of different religions worldwide. And a lot of times it's associated with prayer and worship and really just letting go of something that you think you depend on and kind of giving it up to a higher being, higher power, you name it. And there's just a lot of peace about knowing that um, I'm not alone while I'm fasting or not depending on food as my source to sustain me. Mental benefits as well. Going along with that, just the ability to, and I'm sure you all have been there. We've all been there where if we skip a meal or, hey, I was planning on eating at 6 o'clock, but dinner's taken forever. It never goes as, I'm cooking and it's just not getting done. And I'm not eating till 7. You start getting that hangry sensation, right? That feeling like, oh, I was supposed to eat an hour ago. I'm hungry. I'm mad. I'm irritated. After not eating for 2 or 3 days and accomplishing that a couple times, you really rely on your past experiences to where, I've gone 3 days without food before. I can go an hour. I can go 2. I can skip a whole meal. It's my body didn't melt. It didn't disintegrate. It was okay. It was fine. I can do it. It kind of makes me think of marathon runners, right? You see on the back of cars the stickers 26.2, something like that. If somebody ran a marathon, that's a huge accomplishment. I've never ran more than 3 miles, but if somebody ran 26 miles, for them to go out and run 3 or 5 or 10 miles, even if they're deconditioned, even though it's been a while, they can do it up here mentally. They know what it takes to push through to where, they can accomplish that. So there's a lot of mental benefits once you get to these certain landmarks of fasting to where you just become tougher, mentally tougher to where you don't, again, depend on food as much. All right, everyone, I got about 5 minutes left, and then I'll open it up for questions if you have any. How to prolong fast. The big advice that I do give everyone is just work up to it. I don't recommend jumping into a 72-hour fast by any means. Will you experience these benefits? Yes, absolutely, but it might just be a little harder. It's a shock to the system. It's pretty intense, and if you don't know what to expect and if you're not used to it, it can be a somewhat negative experience. You might not enjoy the process. So what I would encourage you, how I started is I just skipped one meal. I just said, okay, January 1st, I'm going to skip breakfast and I'll eat lunch at noon and I'll eat dinner and then I'll be fine. And then months later, March, April, I said, okay, I'm going to try to skip 2 meals today. I'm just going to eat dinner. Let me skip breakfast and lunch. I'll eat around 4 or 5 o'clock and that'll be my meal. And then as I got accustomed to it, every few weeks, every few months, I would challenge my body with more and more. And then eventually, I did a 24-hour fast. And then eventually I did a 48. And I've worked my way up all the way to around 3.5 days, which has been really, really neat for me. But again, I would never recommend just jumping right in. Make sure you adapt and train your body both mentally and physiologically. And then last but not least, everyone, the refeeding process. Again, after not eating for 2, 3, 3.5 days, it's very important to kind of ease in. You just gave your body a 72-hour vacation, specifically your stomach, your intestines. You don't want to just bombard it, 1, with a bunch of sugar, but 2, just with a lot of mass, because it can cause some serious indigestion, discomfort, even potentially vomiting if you work your stomach too hard. So easing into it, definitely. Usually a lot of different protocols recommend liquids for the first day or so. And a lot of them recommend staying in that ketosis state for a little bit and not introducing carbs to jolt that insulin that we talked about, that we've really zeroed out. But it really just depends on you. And I've done so many different types of refeeding protocols to where none of the things on the websites really fit me and what my body needs. You kind of just need to alter it. So I'll share with you what I've done recently. I've gotten this from a website and then kind of, again, I manipulated it and changed it to fit me. But I won't read everything to you. You can see this and you'll have access to these PowerPoints in this video. However, the first day is pretty much all liquid. It's bone broth, which is actually really tasty if you haven't had bone broth, if you're okay with beef or chicken bone broth. A protein shake with just water and then some olive oil to just maintain some healthy fats. Day 2, I do introduce some solid foods. However, with the vegetables, I do steam them just because it's hard to break down raw vegetables, especially when your stomach's been on vacation for a few days. And then on the 3rd day, you can see I'm introducing more of a more complex carbs with the roasted potatoes, strawberries as well. But a big thing that I've had to introduce here is fiber as well. So I've had to compromise my ketosis to introduce more fiber. Once I start eating the steak and the eggs and all those things, I have noticed that my stool habits, my bowel movements have changed. So after not eating for a few days, you do want to make sure that you get up more of on a regular, your normal routine. So introducing fiber, low glycemic foods wouldn't be a bad idea. Some folks resort to stool softeners, just take some kind of magnesium or calcium tablets as well. That's an idea. But you definitely don't want to do more harm than good by getting all these benefits and then having to be really constipated and uncomfortable. All right. So last thoughts, everyone, is just making this fun because it is a challenge. It is a very, it's tasking. It's very mentally challenging. It's very physically daunting in some cases if you're not used to it. So there's a lot of different things you can do to help you through this. Meditation, really just, focusing on your breath or focusing on something else other than being hungry. You can journal and log. A lot of times I journal my weight throughout the days. I journal my water intake, which is really important. And I just journal how I feel. Hey, I'm doing good at this time. Oh, I slept awesome. Oh, I didn't sleep good this night. Just to kind of keep track and keep a little diary of your experiences. I mentioned the importance of exercise. And then last but not least, you can have an accountability partner. It's really easier when you have somebody to lean on. When you have somebody going through the same thing you're going through, it's really nice to have somebody to talk to versus just being in isolation. Now, with the spiritual and the mental benefits, there is some unique perks to being in isolation and just focusing on yourself and something else. However, sometimes accountability is really nice. And then you can gamify it. You can have competitions and challenges with your friends, with your peers. Hey, let's all do a 24-hour fast together. And if we can all do it, if we can all make it, let's once we're done refeeding, let's go out to our favorite restaurant Saturday to celebrate. Or hey, let's have a competition. Let's see how many people in our family or in our chat can get to 36 hours. And whoever can get to 36 hours, I'll send you a prize or send you like a letter in the, whatever you want to do. Make it a challenge, make it a competition. But also put thresholds, make sure you're not going overboard. So that's my experience with prolonged fasting, everybody. Here are my sources. And again, I pulled research from, everywhere from the 1990s to 2016 to 2018. You see, even research from 2022. There's so much information that's out there. And again, not everybody fits in the same umbrella. You kind of want to work through it and see what works for you. I know my body has certain limitations. I can't follow all of the extremes. So I just modify it. Sometimes, folks who maybe if you're doing a fast during the summertime and you're outside and you're sweating a lot, maybe an all water fast might not be a good idea. Maybe you want to mix some electrolytes. You want to put some salts in your water just to make sure you're not losing too much through your sweat, excuse me. So with that said, everyone, I hope you enjoyed it. Again, this is not required by any means to be healthy. It's just another tool in the toolbox to where it could produce some really neat benefits throughout the body, potentially help with longevity and overall wellness. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Or if I don't know the answer, I'd be happy to do some more research and digging to help you answer them. So feel free to come on the microphone. Also, feel free to type in the chat as well if you have any questions. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Lori. Now, I have had some cons. It wasn't all rainbows and butterflies. As I mentioned, I've had some sleep issues. My cortisol levels really peak when I'm in a prolonged fast. I have no problem falling asleep. I can go to bed at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., you name it. The problem is after that second, third night, I wake up around 12:30 a.m., 1 a.m., and I am wired. I can clean the whole house. I can do everything. And that's not really good if you're trying to sleep, right? So if you got deadlines, not a bad idea, but it's there are some cons, there are some trade-offs with this process. Awesome, Melinda. That's great. That's really good. Excellent. Yeah. For me personally, everyone, I only do this twice a year. Several people recommend do it once a month, do it once a quarter. As I mentioned, it's extreme. It's tough. It's tasking. So I generally do it once every 6 months. Usually I do one in January and then I do one in July, and that's kind of my limitations. Maybe as I continue with it, I'll be more comfortable doing it more often. But I only do it twice a year, the long ones. I'll do some intermittent fasting based on my schedule sometimes. But Amber, absolutely, yes. I'll find a way. We can send this to you. Whether you, yeah, absolutely. I'll find a way to absolutely get that to you. I'm having a hard time moving forward, but all sorts of really neat resources. Um, the fifth one, I know you can't really read that just because the font is so small. But the fifth one, Dr. Longo, has some really cool research with cancer and combining prolonged fasting with allopathic medicine, with traditional chemotherapy. So they have a control group where people are getting chemotherapy for their cancer. And then you have another group where they're getting chemotherapy and prolonged fasting. And it's amazing what they found out with how cancer cells respond to the treatment and starvation of nutrients. Pretty phenomenal. Excellent. Any other questions? Any observations? Anything else you want to talk about? All right, everyone. Well, I will put my contact information in the chat. And then, so basically, it's my first name and last name. It's joshua.delisandro@purdueglobal.edu for those of you watching the recording. And if you ever have any questions, now, future, anytime, please feel free to reach out to me. And again, I'm not I don't have a PhD in this stuff, but I have done years and years of research and compiled a lot of information to where I feel comfortable doing this with my own body and answering a lot of the questions that some people have hesitancy or concerns about. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you coming today. I appreciate you taking the time to invest in learning something new, or just, rejogging the memory and the importance of potentially prolonged fasting in your health repertoire. Again, not required, but it's just another tool in the toolbox, as I mentioned earlier, that could be beneficial down the road, especially with some of those neurodegenerative issues that I mentioned. So I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and I appreciate your time and hope you have a great day.